is starting. It's Interpreting the Transition in Myanmar Part 2. And the chair is Mr. Sanjay Pulipaka. And over to Sanjay Pulipaka.
Thank you. We had very good sessions in the morning, two very good sessions. We enjoyed it, and let's move on to the third session very quickly. I won't take much time because we are already running behind schedule by about 20 minutes. And the first presentation will be Dr. Anshuman Behera, and he'll be talking about insurgency, drugs, small arms in Myanmar. He is currently assistant professor here at NIAS, and prior to this he worked at IDSA and Institute for Conflict Management. Anshuman, all yours.
Actually, it's so intimidating to speak on Myanmar in presence of such learned people here. When Mile asked me to speak on insurgency, drugs, and small arms in Myanmar, he categorically told me that you should focus on the history of the insurgency, how it evolved in Myanmar. So I'll stick to his orders. Before I get into my presentation, just an act of provocation that when I read the so-called insurgent groups in Myanmar, I don't find barring 2-3 groups, any other groups qualify to be an insurgent group in Myanmar. But then we have a tendency that we use these words so interchangeably, that the rebels, civil war, insurgency, uprising, and all these things so interchangeably. So I'll stick to this populist interpretation of insurgency, because when I say insurgency, insurgency is a larger kind of terminology and with heavily loaded kind of qualities, which aims at overthrowing an existing government to achieve their political mileage through the use of violence, which the regime which they think are completely legitimate. So when I'm reading and going through 30-odd insurgent groups, the so-called insurgent groups, I don't find, bearing the KNU and the CPB that was there until 1988, or Kachin to some extent the KIO, any other insurgent group could graduate to that level. Okay, having said that, if I have to analyze the whole insurgency scenario in Myanmar, I would say that there are two important representations come. One, how the government has represented itself to the insurgent groups and to the larger audience, and how the insurgent groups have represented themselves to the audience. The government of Myanmar has represented itself as a weak parliamentary regime in 1948 to 58, a military caretaker government in 1958 to 1960, a socialist military regime from 1962 to 1988, military junta 1988 to 2011, and military regime with a civilian limited democratic government since 2011. If I come to the insurgent groups, I find they have formed. Old ones were either defeated or signed ceasefire agreements with the government. The existing ones kept on changing their demands, allied with each other against, and splintered from the parent groups or changed from their fighting. This has been the overall story of insurgency in Myanmar. Having said that, let me get into the history. The ethnic insurgency or the ethnic fighting strife in Myanmar, it has its deep historical roots. It existed before the British came, and it existed during the British. The British actually capitalized this strife between among the ethnic groups. And the World War II, where the ethnic groups were divided on siding with either the Allied forces or the Japanese fascist thing, then when the British was leaving in 1947, I'm going a bit quick because I have to meet the time. 1947, all these groups came together February 12th to sign what they call the Panglong Agreement. I would say much of fight these days we are witnessing in Myanmar, in a way, it is a process to go back to the Panglong Agreement. Okay, this was an all-inclusive kind of agreement, and this 1947 constitution that actually deviated from the Panglong Agreement was not accepted by many of the ethnic groups. And the San groups and the current, the KNU right now we have, they were never part of this agreement. And in 1948, the Communist Party of Burma emerged as a major insurgent force. I qualify this particular group as an insurgent force because it has a political agenda, though completely communist in nature, but it actually posed a solid kind of security threat to the Myanmar government during that time. And if you see the nature of insurgency from 1947 to 1988, you would find that there was a predominance of CPB on the ethnic groups. What does it mean? The ideology, that is the communism, played an important role, actually subverting the ethnic identities. And that was the reason when the ethnic groups, they felt that their stand is not represented to the government, they came together and they formed what they call the National Democratic Front in 1976. There are many ups and downs of the relation between the CPB and the NDF, and though there was kind of love and hate relationship between these two groups, they came together, they realized that there is a common enemy, that is the state run by the military, they should come together and fight against it. And there was one military joint operation against the state in 1986. The regular misunderstanding and split from both NDF and the CPB actually some sort of empowered these ethnic groups to come and demand their rights and political sort of rights in terms of their ethnic identity. If you take a military kind of approach here, you'd find there was a mighty state army fighting only 20,000 rebels, if you put all these ethnic groups together. What was striking in this time, there was a fundamental difference between the KNU, that the current National Union, and the other groups. This was the only group till 2011 that maintained a political stand. They have never signed a ceasefire with the government. Every time government forced them or approached them to sign a ceasefire or get into a kind of peace talk, they would always request the government or demand that there should be a political resolution. Ceasefire on terms of military thing will not work. I'll come to that later. These are, there is a small table you'll find. These are the like 6-7 groups which are prominent groups during this time. What was the state response to the insurgency during this time? The state could think of no other thing but the military approach. So they went ahead with some idea called the 4 cuts, like cutting like all the kind of excess of the insurgent groups, excessive to food, funding, intelligence, recruit. And they achieved, if I say the counter-insurgency perspective of the state from a completely military point of view, the state could achieve enormously significant achievement of the state, but they had to pay a heavy price in terms of loss of life and property when it comes to the ethnic groups. And that was the time, 1960s, you would see in the international area, like in the arena, there are some wonderful ideas coming up. There was a partyless panchayat democracy in Nepal, there was limited democracy in Pakistan, there was something in Egypt, and then there was a Burma way to socialism in Myanmar. And when I failed to understand what exactly New Win meant by Burma way to socialism, but it was a challenge to the CPB, that was the major idea to curtail the communist ideology or the legitimacy that the CPB used to enjoy. And when the Burma way of socialism has 2 sort of secret policies. One was to depoliticize the ethnicity, that will not engage with the ethnic insurgent groups politically. That was the hallmark of the strategy. The moment you engage with them politically, that means you surrender the so-called Burmese autonomy to these kind of people. And rejected political autonomy, that was the crux of the Panglong Agreement in 1947. During this time, there are some peace talks, very, very theoretically, 1963 to 64 and 80-81, and only to fail, and there was no effective economic offering for the frontier areas. This is where the Burmese army and the Burmese state committed time and again the mistakes that they didn't actually design any sort of economic model that would offer to legitimize their stand in the frontier areas. During this time, there was disintegration of CPB. As I told, the ethnic groups, they felt that their interests are not exactly represented by the CPB. And there was a constant pressure, militarily and otherwise, from the state government, and the CPB collapsed. And the CPB also collapsed because the Chinese Communist Party no more supported them. And it formed a group of ethnic insurgent groups. During this time, there was very interesting thing also happened, you people know it, that the demonetization of largest currency notes, that actually forced the state into an economic kind of crisis, and the failed socialist experience, and economic sanctions by the major foreign powers that actually pushed the state to think about your approaches towards the insurgent groups in an alternative fashion. And 1990 election is there for you, and what happened, I'll not repeat on this thing, and that actually created a kind of a resentment among the people against the state. And now, what was important, that the Burmese themselves started raising their voice against the Burma-dominated kind of regime. And if you look into this thing, why I'm showing this slide, it has a bigger kind of interest involved, that both the ethnic groups and the state, they're so much involved in fighting with each other that they never looked at the human security issues. The civilians caught in crossfire. I was seeing there is a body of movie literatures available on how during this period ethnic groups carrying guns get into the villages, and they used to take taxes from the same people they claim to represent. That is where the whole idea, the whole question of legitimacy of a particular group and the state is questioned. And there are some indices here, I'll not get into that. And there was also a spillover effect on the neighboring countries, and many people, actually the refugees, they went to Thailand, some parts of China, India, and Laos. Okay, did I miss anything? Okay, and what was the state approach, the state response till 1980 to 2001? You would find that there was a constant mobilization of force against the insurgencies. Some 273 battalion of forces were mobilized for the northeast and eastern frontiers by 1997. At the same time, the state was also cracking down on the pro-democratic protesters in the mainland, and they all fled to the border areas. And when the state was actually floating around and boasting around that they achieved a lot in terms of counterinsurgency, that was a qualified success, because they achieved it at the loss of their legitimacy and the loss of life and property. And this is the time when they felt that the people will come together, the pro-democratic protesters and the insurgents, and the need for a ceasefire initiative was felt among the state. The SLORC, that is the State Law and Order Restoration Committee, was formed under pressure in 1988, and the mandate of this particular committee was to ensure law and order, safe transportation and communication, adequacy of food, housing, preparation for election. And when they actually wrote in pen and paper that this is their priority, no initiative was made to achieve these kind of goals. And there was a transfer, the renaming of SLRC to SDPC in 1997. And SDPC till today actually boasts about itself, saying that they have been very successful in ceasefire initiative. In fact, they have been. And a number of groups actually signed the ceasefire. If you see these groups, and I have taken some effort to put them when they actually formed the group and when they joined the ceasefire group. You'll find there are many groups, they joined the ceasefire within 1 month time, within 1 year time, within 6 months time. And what is another striking feature is, you'll find in one state, say for example, Shan state, there are more than 5 insurgent groups representing a small number of people, say maybe 1 million. So the people who are confused, which side is truly representing their case to the state government, which indicates that these people who are never connected with the people, they never represented the voice of the people. That means these people never graduated to an insurgent kind of force. You come to the non-ceasefire groups, the Karen National Union figures on the top, and it was one of the longest insurgent groups in Myanmar. And these groups, subsequently, by 2011, many of them have joined the ceasefire groups. The peace talk is on. But you'd find that till 2011, all these groups never joined this thing. There are some exceptions, but many of the groups here, they found that, except the current National Union, the economic incentives their counterpart are getting, these people are not getting. That is why they didn't join the ceasefire. 5 minutes? Okay, I'll run through. Whether the ceasefire was effective and all that, I'll not get into that. Then the insurgency in Myanmar since 2011, all this peace talk in the last session they have spoken, but I am very, very skeptical that whether this will bring any success to the Myanmar kind of, the election we are going to have later this year. And I feel that when the state is talking about the peace initiatives, at the same time the state is involved in sort of violence against the groups like Kachins and the MNDA, that is the Kokang groups and the Arakan rebels, and mobilizing the force on a regular basis against these people, I don't think political resolution and political violence can go together. And this is the major area of contestation where I am skeptical of the thing that this will never get a kind of conclusive, logical conclusion. When I come to the drug, actually it fascinates me that a small thing like drug, okay, of course in a security kind of thing, people actually jump to the thing that drug and small arms are big things, okay, it also caters to the media need. But I think this is one particular commodity, how it has been used as state building in Myanmar, that actually fascinates me. These are some of the indices that it is the second largest kind of producer of opium. It is also home to vastly expanding production of ATS, amphetamine type stimulus, that is. And drug has correlation with a prolonged period of state building following the pro-democracy protest in 1988 and significant decline in the insurgencies. What I want to say here that drug has a political importance in the state building process in Myanmar. Through drug, the state actually pushed itself into the territories of the insurgent groups where they used to operate, and slowly it was trying to build up itself. Drug actually arrived in, it was very much there in the San province and some parts of Kachin area, but the KMT, that is the Kuomintang, the force that came from China to fight against the Chinese Communist Party and the support of the CIA. And in 1950s, the opium production had risen to like to 10 to 20-fold. And opium trade and production were overlooked as halting the communist China was a priority by the US and Thailand, and the Myanmar government also closed their eyes. Drugs trade carried out by other groups once KMT was smoked out of Myanmar, and military coup in 1962 and pressing need for opium trade and production. There are three major factors which actually boosted the drug trade since 1950, during 1950 and 88. There are gross mismanagement of centrally planned economy created thriving black market economy in which opium smuggled across Myanmar's borders become the only valuable means of exchange of goods needed. External factor, I'm reading because there is a paucity of time. External factors like Thailand's willingness to tolerate the drugs on its northern border, viewing insurgent groups as a useful buffer against the possible encroachment of CPB and Myanmar army. Then Ne Win's attempt to establish self-financing counter-insurgency militia in the border regions in the mid-60s further strengthened the drugs trade. Ne guaranteed these key units, that means self-sustaining units, in access to all government-controlled roads, and legal impunity was provided to them to engage in drug trade in return to their promise to fight against the state's enemies. That is where the state wanted the groups, one particular insurgent group, to fight against another insurgent group that the state was more threatened of. 1988 to 2011, there was a disintegration of CPB, emergence of other groups. What happened that these groups, they formed a kind of alliance of convenience with the state, and that actually pushed the drug trade more. The opium production during 1987 to 95 rose from 850 to 2,377 tons, with cultivation area from 92,300 to 150,000 hectares. Number of heroin refineries multiplied. When I read this kind of alliance of convenience, I find that such alliance of convenience was used by the state to further the interest of minimizing violence that these groups are involved in, plotting the groups against one another to centralize violence. That is the aim of every political state to achieve. An act of curtailing legitimacy of the insurgent groups that they used to win from the people they claim to be representing, and in a larger picture, this was an act of state building in Myanmar. By 2 minutes? Okay. By 2009, there was a rapid kind of decline of drug production in Myanmar, and Okay, the rapid rise of ATS, Myanmar emerged as a leading producer of ATS. In 2009 alone, 93 million of ATS peel was seized from China, Thailand, and Myanmar. Why I'm saying this, the Myanmar government and some of the insurgent groups during this time, they had imposed an anti-drug policy. And what was the need of this anti-drug policy? Because there was a constant pressure from US and Thailand and some other neighboring countries that these groups are not exactly the insurgent groups, but they are the narco armies. And they are so much involved in the kind of drug trade. This is a challenge to the world in a bigger way. But then these people imposed an anti-drug kind of policy, which the state also boasted around. But in reality, the drug trade, once it was into the socio-political and economic life of the people, it continued to rise. And all this anti-drug kind of policy, it was proved to be economically unsustainable in the light of lack of alternative development models. Over the past 60 years, drugs and politics have been inextricably linked with involvement in the drug trade and underpinning attempts to both strengthen and subvert the state. Okay. Now, some interesting thing I would like to share with you. In 2009, the state army actually attacked the MNDAA, that is a Kokang group, on the charges that the MNDAA is involved in the illicit drug trade and production. You would remember that in 1988, when MNDAA actually got into the alliance with the state, and it was given a free hand by the state to go for a kind of open opium production and sale. When they attacked this particular group and still the fighting is on, what it signifies that the state didn't want to grant the power of exercising complete force to any particular group. Drug has been part of the socio-political and economic life, and in conflict resolution, what we say, the unfortunate activities have turned to be a socio-political realities. Coming to the small arms, this is one place where I think that, okay, this has been much of hype in the media and otherwise, that arms trade is taking place and Myanmar is a transit route and all these things. But I didn't find that the small arms are so significant in Myanmar, because Myanmar is a disturbed area. There is a China there and there is Northeast India here. There are some insurgent groups operating. There has to be some arms involved in that. Okay, there are some reports that the unified war state army is involved in arms making, but this has to be qualified. And arms continues to flow from China through Ruli and along with Sino-Myanmar border in Yunnan province. And there are also reports that this is a transit route of small arms to the South Asian countries, but I think this is much of hype. Any state, say for example, Gorakhpur in India, you will find more arms trade than what is happening in Myanmar and northeast part of India. I rest my case here. If there is any question, I'll love to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshuman. That's a wonderful presentation. When we often talk about transition, we tend to focus on formal activities, and Anshuman's presentation focused on informal dimensions such as illicit drugs. How do organizations sustain themselves? When we talk of organizations, we often, such as ethnic groups, armed ethnic groups, we focus on political grievance. Anshuman is flipping it and seeing it as how do they survive the other organizational needs in terms of finances, and what do they do for such survival. And the next presentation will be from Dr. Priyanca Mathur. She's Assistant Professor and Coordinator at the Master's Department of Political Science and Graduate Research Center at St. Joseph's College here. She's associated with the Institute of Human Development, and she studied at JNU as well as in Refugee Studies Center, University of Oxford, UK. Dr. Priyanca.
Thank you so much to the chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me begin by first thanking NIAS for giving me this opportunity for being here with you today. A very warm welcome to all our distinguished guests from Myanmar, and a special good afternoon to all my distinguished colleagues here. Today I'm going to speak from the perspective of a political scientist and particularly a researcher passionate about refugee causes. I'm not here, let me please lay out my cards on the table, as any Myanmar great expert at all. my focus is, and my area of research has always been refugees, and my current work revolves around Rohingya refugees. As I speak right now, the first publication of our project looking at Rohingya refugees in Hyderabad, in the camps in Hyderabad, is out for publication. And so my perspective is going to be from that point of view. And particularly here, my focus is going to be on the sectarian conflict in Myanmar, that is the Rohingya case. My slides are also not going to be very, very illustrative. They're just going to be indicative of the points that I want to raise. The boat people, the nowhere people. These are terminologies that have become synonymous with the most persecuted minority in the world, the Rohingyas. In fact, unable to claim citizenship in Myanmar, where around 1.1 million of them live in the Rakhine, or in any other country, these stateless people have been living with the curse of having no nationality to claim as their own. You will all recall that the world witnessed one of its gravest humanitarian challenges in recent times when images started flooding the media of refugees fleeing religious persecution in Myanmar and economic misery in Bangladesh were left to die stranded in traffickers' boats in the Andaman Sea and the Indian Ocean. People who could not turn back to the countries that they had run away from, people whom the Southeast Asian countries that lay on their horizon were refusing to take them in. So the question that I pose today, and leave it to the moral conscience of all of us here, is where do these Rohingyas go? We all know that the country's peace process makes no provision for dealing with the ongoing sectarian violence. The Myanmar government refuses to even recognize the term Rohingya, simply saying that they do not exist. Well, if things keep going as they are, they may soon even have their wish. Well, it's partly also to blame that for the thousands of the desperate Rohingyas who were left stranded at sea of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Now, the Rohingyas' claim to citizenship rests on their assertion that they are an ethnic indigenous group of Myanmar, and they can trace their lineage. They can trace their lineage to the rich and the ancient heritage of the old Arakan kingdom, and that they are not merely Bengalis. The original terminology of the word Rohingya can be traced back to simply meaning inhabitant of Rohang, the early Muslim name for the independent kingdom of the Arakan, now Rakhine. Now, okay, let me just go on. Of the word Rohingyas and their original place of residence. According to a popular belief, the term Rohingya has been derived from the Islam word Rehma or Rehem, which basically means mercy. And it is believed that after a shipwreck near the Ramri island, the Arakanese king commanded the Arab traders to be executed. And these people pleaded to the king, shouting Rehem, meaning mercy. And later these people were referred to as Rohang or then Rohingyas. We also hear about a group of Bengali Muslims who were migrating to Burma who called themselves the Rohingyas. Well, whatever their origin might be, the Rohingyas, due to their statelessness, have been facing a number of challenges, not just in Myanmar, but also in the other various countries that they have been migrating to. Way back in the 8th century, as traders and seafarers, Muslim migrants from the Middle East had first entered the Arakan. And then during the 17th century, thousands of Bengali Muslims were captured by the marauding Arakanese, sold as slaves, and forced to serve in the king of the Arakan's army and to settle in the Arakan. This was followed by the conquest of the Arakan by the Buddhist Burmese from the south of the country in 1725, wherein the Rohingya refugees were either executed or were driven out. And it led what can be traced back to thus the first flight of around 35,000 Arakanese people from Arakan into Bengal, then part of British-ruled India. Then came the First Anglo-Burmese War, 1824-26, which saw the British not just conquer Arakan, but also encourage the farmers from the neighboring British-ruled Bengal to move to the depopulated area of Arakan. The sudden influx of immigrants, in fact, from British India sparked a strong reaction from the mostly Buddhist Rakhine people living in Arakan at the time, sowing the seeds of the ethnic tension that remain to this day. It is this mass immigration which boosted the rural colonial economy, but the local Arakanese bitterly resented this. They perceived that their jobs and their lands were being taken away by the people whom they still call as the illegal immigrants, or just pejoratively as the Bengalis. And with their own sense of victimhood overriding, the Myanmarese governments have thus always been reluctant to grant the Rohingya citizenship and acceptance as an indigenous ethnic group. In 1948, Burma gained independence from British rule, and in 1962, the coup d'etat by General Ne Win signaled the beginning of the overwhelming dominance of the army in that country. But the Rohingyas continued to be deprived of citizenship, marking a policy of exclusion that was made official with the passing of the 1982 citizenship law that deemed them stateless. In fact, Myanmar's Rohingyas Muslims aren't recognized by the constitution, and they were even overlooked by the country's first census in 30 years in 2014. And they have for many years been living miserably, hungrily, meagrely in camps often labeled as open-air prisons. Several Nobel Peace Prize winners, including South Africa's Desmond Tutu, Iranian human rights activist Shireen Ebadi, and former East Timor President Jose Ramos Horta, have made the appeal, calling the situation of the Rohingyas in Myanmar, within quotes, nothing less than genocide, and calling for an end to the persecution of the Rohingya Muslims. But Myanmar's foreign ministry has categorically rejected this unbalanced, within quotations, unbalanced and the negative comments, and said in a statement that such comments simply turn a blind eye to Myanmar's efforts on rebuilding trust between the Buddhists and the Muslims in the Western Rakhine state, as well as granting citizenship to national verification process to those Bengalis living in Myanmar for many years. Others who have criticized Myanmar's policies in Oslo include philanthropist George Soros, who escaped the Nazi-occupied Hungary and had said that there are alarming parallels between the plight of the Rohingya and the Nazi genocide. Now, unfortunately for Myanmar, despite recent moves from the military to semi-civilian rule, there is still a constant threat of violence. And since the passing of the new constitution in 2008 and the elections in 2010, Myanmar's military leaders look increasingly keen to turn their backs on the nation's martial past. In fact, in the last 5 years, we've been discussing since morning, the country has undergone astonishing political, economic, and social reform. It has seen the arrival of grand shopping malls, fast food courts in the richer suburbs of Yangon. Young and old, rich and poor can all afford SIM cards to power mobile phones, lubricate social connections, gateways to the wider world via Facebook. The newly constructed capital of Naypyidaw is an abode of the kings with manicured lawns and vast governmental compounds, carved from scrubland and rice paddies, shining with the gaudy trappings of a revitalized nation. Membership to the ASEAN, opening of the front door to the West, the lifting of economic sanctions have increased press freedoms, investments in the institutions of law and justice, all are welcome changes to what was once an international pariah. Well, amongst the changes, Myanmar's former military masters have also worked hard to reconcile past ethnic conflict with ongoing insurgencies. And like much of the European colonizers left in wake in their worldwide conquests, these conflicts have their roots in minorities which have been left at the fringes of a reconstituted nation who took up arms when they realized that they were being denied autonomy. In recent years, we have seen in Myanmar that democratic reform has gone hand in hand with peace talks, with ceasefires being negotiated with all of the country's major rebel groups, and most notably the Kachin Independence Army. There was even a historical accord with the Karen National Union, whose army has waged war with the central government since 1949. Yet, although conflict has declined nationwide, fighting with the KIA has flared up again, and that too with the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, based in the Chinese-speaking, self-administered area of Kokang in the northeast of the Shan state and near the border in China. And it is this renewed conflict with the Kachin that has also caused a humanitarian crisis and led to the international condemnation of the military for alleged human rights abuses. These recent escalations, as has been said, show that there is no silver bullet to historical legacies, and the potential for renewed conflict is only a strike of the match away, as it can be said. And to temper the mood of Myanmar's oft-wanted reform, there is also the major problem of sectarian violence between the country's majority Buddhist and minority Muslim populations. Rearing its ugly head in the Rakhine state in 2012, which saw hundreds killed and some 100,000 people internally displaced, the clashes quickly soon spread throughout the nation. In fact, the ethnic cleansing in the Rakhine state in Myanmar in 2012 was triggered by the rape and murder, as we can recall, of a Rakhine woman by 3 Muslim men, which led to Rakhine mobs rampaging through Sitwe and other parts of Rakhine to drive out the Rohingyas from their midst. The violence that ensued led to the death of hundreds and mass displacement of thousands of Rohingyas. Anti-Muslim riots have in fact rocked Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city. The city has seen radical Buddhists wielding swords and bricks killing people. The Muslim communities of traders and businessmen, who make up about 5% of the population, with many earning their income from small family-run businesses, live in that city, who have been a major part of the country's economy since the colonial rule of the British East India Company. Today, they allege that politically charged anti-Muslim speech and widespread sectarian violence are threatening their livelihoods. Mama Gya, a 56-year-old Muslim who owns a bike rental and a convenience store in Mandalay, said, "We were closed for a whole week. So there was no income. I usually make around $300 per month, but now there are not many tourists, so I can only rent out a couple of bikes per day. I'm only making about 20% of what I was." In fact, as many as 80% of Muslim businesses in the Rakhine state were affected by the violence, particularly in the state's capital, Sitwe. This kind of sectarian violence, thus we see, has particularly had an economic impact on Muslims who live in the presence of police, in constant fear of retribution, of blockade, of losing their businesses, of sliding into poverty. And the anti-Muslim nationalist sentiment has particularly hurt their commercial interests in this region. Businesses owned by Muslims were looted by Rakhine extremists, and more than 300 Muslim-owned shops, the town's largest, were quickly abandoned in that particular year. And along with commerce, this sectarian conflict has also impacted the tourism industry. The government believes that continued violence would threaten the country as a whole, and the Deputy Information Minister and the presidential spokesman, E. Thut, had said that communal violence is a big challenge for Myanmar, not only for foreign investment, but also for the stability of the country and Myanmar society. This simmering tension between the Rakhine Buddhists and the Rohingya Muslims in Western Myanmar, which began in 2012, continued through the year. It led to the loss of hundreds of lives, destruction of thousands of homes, and displacements of thousands of people. The central government intervened to end the bloodshed, but tensions continued to linger. And despite the government's plans to undertake several programs to address the ramifications of the 2012 violence and its attempt to prevent the violence from happening again, the remedial measures are unlikely to sustain without any political situation. Since the anti-Muslim violence that has started in 2012, hundreds and thousands of the estimated 1.2 million to 1.5 million Rohingyas have fled the country, with another 150,000 winding up in camps. They live in camps as internally displaced persons in Myanmar. And according to the Human Rights Watch, the country's laws have discriminated against the Rohingyas, infringing on their rights to freedom of movement, education, and employment. They are denied land and property rights and ownership. The land on which they live can be taken away anytime. Many have fled to neighboring Bangladesh, a country that forcibly repatriated thousands of them back in 1990s. Today, they continue to flee to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines, and some have even come to India and settled in places like Delhi and Jammu in the north and Hyderabad in the south. And no place to call as home on land, thousands still live on boats in the high seas, abandoned by smugglers and traffickers. The Rohingyas today are at a grave risk of facing additional mass atrocities, even genocide. While Buddhist monks and their supporters march through Rangoon to denounce the blaming of the Burma for this crisis, the Pakistani Taliban, most hardline faction, has called on the oppressed Rohingyas to take up the sword and to kill in the path of God. Rohingya refugees have been thus crossing the international border and coming into India for a long time now. In recent years, we have seen many have been taking shelter in India. And now it is estimated that there are around 25,000 Rohingya Muslims who have taken shelter in India, though not all of them have landed up in the government-certified refugee camps. As of now, 1,500 Rohingyas who were displaced in Myanmar have been camping in the city of Hyderabad for more than a year, but basic amenities such as food, clean water, medicine, and clothes, they still elude them. They arrived in India after being attacked by the ethnic Rakhine Buddhists, while Myanmar's government forces did little to stop the violent assaults. Like Muhammad Shakir, a Rohingya refugee who reached the Muslim-friendly city of Hyderabad, said, "Through a circuitous route, traveling first 3 days on foot, then through rough mountain terrain in the dead of the night to reach the Myanmar border, and then he boarded a boat run by smugglers to reach the Bangladesh border. Hours later, after he was stowed in a truck to be finally dropped near the West Bengal border. All in all, it took him 9 days to finally land up in Hyderabad." Delhi, being the national capital and the seat of the UNHCR office, is naturally the place that they get pulled to. And according to the UN estimates, there are around 11,000 Rohingyas who have moved to different parts of India in the aftermath of the communal violence since June 2012. Apart from New Delhi, many have moved to Jammu in North India, Pune in West India, and Hyderabad in South India. And according to Mala Reddy, the Joint Commissioner of Police Special Branch Hyderabad, many are also living in other cities like Aligarh, Mathura, Kolkata. Now, the Rohingya refugees believe that Hyderabad, the city of Hyderabad, on account of its substantial Muslim population, would welcome them with open arms. But in fact, the Hyderabad-based Confederation of Voluntary Associations, COVA, an NGO at the forefront of the Rohingya rehabilitation, says only 1,200 asylum seekers have registered with them so far, and there are many more which are likely to come. Now, as of 1st June 2015, there are, according to UNHCR statistics, 8,836 Rohingya refugees, 2,434 Rohingya asylum seekers which are registered with the UNHCR in Delhi. And around them, the figures keep changing, 1,400, 1,500 to 2,000 in Hyderabad. Now, of them who have come in, some have been sent back to Myanmar by UNHCR for the fact that they are unable to prove that their life is under threat. And those who have remained, they have settled in Hafiz Babab Nagar in Balapur, Babanagar, Sainagar, Chandragunta, and the Kishanbagh areas of the old city. And most of the refugees live in groups, with the highest number of them having been concentrated in Balapur, says Krishna Kumar, the program officer of COVA, who looks after the welfare of these asylum seekers. Now, I can actually go on a lot about the Rohingya refugees in Hyderabad, but this is not the place for that. So I would like to just conclude with some points here, that the Myanmar state's policies continue to be discriminatory towards its minorities, and the Myanmarese President Thein Sein has recently signed a new law that requires women to wait at least 36 months between bearing successive children. And activists allege that this law is targeted towards the Muslim Rohingya community, whose growth threatens to turn the Buddhists into a minority in the Rakhine state. On the other hand, we have countries like Australia, who are signatories to the UN Refugee Convention, but they refuse to aid more Rohingya asylum seekers. Instead, the Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott has linked stopping terrorism with stopping asylum seekers, and so the country remains. Where do these Rohingya refugees go? Sectarian violence, both against Muslims and Rohingya minorities, is growing worse in other parts of Myanmar, particularly in the states of Rakhine on the country's west coast and in Kachin in the northeast. There have been internal commissions that have been set up to include representatives from different political parties and religious organizations to investigate the sectarian violence, a move that was welcomed by the United Nations Secretary General. This commission is comprised of representation of cross-section of national figures in the country, Ban Ki-moon said in a statement, and it could make important contributions to restoring peace and harmony in the state and in creating a conducive environment for more inclusive way forward for tackling the issues on the causes of the violence. In fact, what is the world saying? The UN Human Rights Rapporteur for Myanmar They have insisted on an independent investigation into allegations that authorities are using excessive force and committing other human rights violations while trying to restore order to the Rakhine state. And Thomas Quintana has said that such an investigation is needed to guarantee accountability because reconciliation will not be possible without this. And exaggerations and distortions will fill the vacuum to fuel distrust and tensions between communities. So we see that if the period of social and political transformation, I may end with this, that followed the election of President Thein Sein continues, ethnic politics will remain to be a major preoccupation for the Myanmar government, ethnic peoples, and the international community. Explaining the varieties of ethnic political interests that are emerging require a new analytical framework in which the nascent electoral system is given adequate attention. Cooperation and contestation are now vying with conflict as primary drivers of ethnic politics. And to account adequately for the interaction of these concepts, there are different manifestations of ethnic political interests today. There exists an ambiguous situation in which the overall pattern of ethnic politics is changing rapidly. The challenge remains of fully reconciling Myanmar's diverse people and including them in one political system. Muslims have said that they were uncertain whether the situation would improve soon. And I will just end with one small quotation. Standing behind the display case in her father's glasses store in Mandalay, a 43-year-old shopkeeper who asked to be called by her nickname Honey for fear of retribution if the rioters returned, said that eventually things will have to get better. Within quotations, one day the people will understand each other and understand what it is to be a Muslim, she said. Thank you.
It's a presentation that talks about the advent of colonial borders and its impact on people, the migration when it interacts with political transitions. And as countries open up through fragile transition processes, they tend to be under greater scrutiny and sometimes greater anxieties propel them to do certain things. The next presentation will be from Ramya. Many of you have interacted with her on email. She will be presenting on the evolution of Tatmadaw, assessing present capabilities. And she did her MA in geopolitics from International Relations and Geopolitics from Manipal University. She was also a freelance reporter for The Hindu. Ramya, you have 20 minutes.
A very good afternoon to everybody. I'm Ramya from ISSSP. At the outset, I'd like to thank our program for giving me this opportunity. Also, this is just a basic assessment that I've attempted to make. I would welcome feedback and comments. So the topic of my presentation is the evolution of the Tatmadaw, assessing present capabilities. This is the format of the presentation. I begin with a short introduction. Then I look at geography and how the Tatmadaw fits into that, the geography of Myanmar, that is. Then take a look at the present capabilities. I've restricted myself from 2010 to 2014, building a picture based on the analysis made and raise some questions that I think need more pondering and discussion and debate. So in terms of internal versus external threats, a lot has been said throughout the day about this. I've not focused on the history of the Tatmadaw in the presentation, as many of us here are aware of it. I've tried to focus on the perception of threats, and then I'll try to link it to the existing capabilities that the Tatmadaw draws on. When a comparison is drawn between the external and internal threats, the Tatmadaw is seen to give more precedence to its internal threats, and this has been re-emphasized through the presentations that were done before me as well. So the declared defense policy of the Tatmadaw has been total people's defense for the Union of Myanmar. If you break down the three national causes that the Tatmadaw outlines are non-disintegration of the Union, non-disintegration of national solidarity, and perpetuation of national sovereignty as its national interests. Later it was called as the national ideology. All of these re-emphasize the point that internal threats gain higher precedence than external threats to Tatmadaw. Internal armed security threat has long overshadowed the security perception of the Tatmadaw. This has in turn impacted the doctrine, force structure, armament, and training. Keeping this in mind, even the power structure within Myanmar kind of indicates the same. Historically, the Tatmadaw has been central to the power structure. One way of looking at this would be in terms of the decision-making apparatus. I've tried to just outline the decision-making apparatuses over the years up till 2008 in terms of even the Implementation Committee Amendment to 2008 Constitution. All of these throughout have seen the influence of the Tatmadaw. Between 1988 to 2011, the Tatmadaw was called as the state within the state. Its power was described as a hegemonic player. However, with the recent transition that we're now discussing, it's called more of a veto player. I think this was touched upon in the previous presentation as well. Keeping the perspective that Tatmadaw gives attention to its internal threats, let's now look at the geography of Myanmar. Geography has to a large extent dictated the type of capabilities and capacities the defense forces within Myanmar have developed. I've just tried to basically look at the physical map. I hope it opens. Basically, I'm just trying to juxtapose how the geographical terrain in terms of the deciduous forests up in the northeast, to the wet swamplands in the Shan state, to the western hills. All of these have dictated the kind of capabilities that the Tatmadaw would have. And then I'm trying to juxtapose that with the conflict map, where you have the peripheries that have more tensions as opposed to the central heartland. Anyways, looking at that, I couldn't specifically show the two maps that I had intended to, and I guess the presentation isn't working now. The point that I'm trying to make is that if you combine the internal threat perception of the Tatmadaw's outlook with the thick forest cover, the mountainous terrain coupled with the wetlands, it becomes clear. Oh, okay. So basically, you have the deciduous forests here, and this is where a lot of the insurgent groups that Professor Behera had earlier explained exist. The reason why I chose this map as opposed to another terrainous map is that it includes the economic activity and the use of land. All of these can be seen in a central region, even when they come down south. If you look at the northeastern region, which has been plagued by insurgency, a lot of this has been taken into advantage because of the geography. So the kind of capabilities that the Tatmadaw would then need to possess are probably attack helicopters, mortars, those kind of equipment. Similarly, if you juxtapose that with the conflict map, this is a 2012 one when the ceasefire agreements were signed, you will note that there's a resonance between the geography and the conflict. I hope that is quite clear. From the thick forests here, you have the hills here. Now, if I keep all these in mind, it becomes clear that the Tatmadaw is a counter-insurgency-based force. Therefore, geography reinstates the center-periphery dynamics. Now, I'll just basically look at the present capabilities of the Tatmadaw. It's grown substantially during the 1988 period. Until 1988, it was quite a modest force. During Nevin's period, that is. Even as of 2014, counterinsurgency focus remains essential to the Tatmadaw, making it a light infantry force. If you keep in mind the geography and the conflict that occurs, you can understand why the capabilities would be driven in this direction. These figures are based on military balance 2010 and 14 figures. The active number of forces within the Tatmadaw, within the defense forces as a whole has been around 4,06,000. The army has the highest, 3,75,000. The navy, 16,000. Air force, 15,000. Paramilitary, 1,07,250. The reason why I put an asterisk there is in the 2010 military balance, it says it's 1,07,500. So there's actually a decrease of what, 250 personnel. Here, what I've tried to do is I've tried to make an assessment of the equipment that the Tatmadaw possesses in 2010 and juxtapose that with 2014. And through various other sources, I've tried to figure out from where they've acquired the equipment from. Now, if you look at the MBT, that is main battle tanks, it was figuring 150 in 2010. It increased to 185. The countries that they've acquired this from are Ukraine, China, Russia. From India, they've acquired Type 55 MBT. Then LTs, you have the same figure, all provided by China again. Recce's 105, 105, UK, Japan. The Japan is an interesting case because during the 50s, the plants that were left of Mazda and Hino were later converted to produce manufacture military equipment, which didn't go down very well between the two governments. Then you had the armored personnel carriers, 325, they increased to 371. The APCT, they got these from Ukraine, which was in 2008. APCW, 30 plus Japan and Ukraine. The PPV, I didn't find any figures in 2010, but in 2014 it was reported to be 10, again from China. Artillery, it's nearly doubled. You have 410. Insurgency focus comes into play there. SP 155 mm from Serbia. Towed, it again doubled. You have it from US, UK, Yugoslavia, Israel, Germany, PRC again. MRL remains the same. MOR, again from China and Israel. Here you have the RCLs, which they got from Singapore. The specific case of Carl Gustav was interesting to me because soon after 1988, when the Tatmadaw tried to modernize its forces, it so happened that Singapore was the first one that came to help in this modernization process. However, Singapore broke an agreement with Sweden in providing Tatmadaw with the Carl Gustav, and later on it ran into problems. You have the SSM. This I have not been able to clarify from a lot of sources, but the Hwasong 6, it's been reported that they've acquired it from North Korea. You have the Navy, 3 frigates. I've noted there that 30 vessels were destroyed due to Cyclone Nargis in 2008. 2014, you have 4 frigates. You have China. Ong Zea was the one that has newly been inducted. This was with the assistance of China in 2008. Patrol and coastal combatants. Again, like I reinstated, the geography dictates the capabilities, and hence you have the need for more coastal combatants. So from 50, it went to 113 in 2014. This was again from China. Air Force, 3 squadrons to 4 squadrons, Russia, UK, US, Japan. All these, the ones that I'm stating, like Russia, UK, US, mostly came in before 1988. Before 1988, a lot of the capabilities of the Tatmadaw were derived from Japan, from US, and from India also. Ground attack forces, you have 2 squadrons, Fantan, remain the same from China. Apart from the states that I've listed out, Myanmar has acquired other equipment such as helicopters of Soviet origin from China. From Pakistan too, it has been able to have a long engagement process. Pakistan has provided Myanmar's Tatmadaw with mortars, recoilless guns, tanks. It's also helped them in submarine training, made friendly boat calls. Soon after the friendly boat call made by Pakistan, it was followed by India. So a lot of analysis goes. However, a lot of them say that the kind of engagement between Myanmar and Pakistan has been overstated and hyped in the media. Andrew Selth, in his book, Burma's Secret Military Partners, elaborates on the arms sales and transactions between Myanmar and 4 major secret partners, namely Germany, Singapore, Israel, and Pakistan. Selth concludes that the secret partners play a significant role in the country's internal affairs in the face of considerable pressure for fundamental political and economic changes in Myanmar. I think this is a lot of food for thought. Keeping all these in mind, if you want to look at a model that works in terms of the transition, given the capabilities of the Tatmadaw, you have the Tatmadaw and you have the insurgency issues, followed by the transition period. I think you cannot look at these in isolation or talk about them in isolation. They feed into each other. If you say that the Tatmadaw has these specific capabilities to fight the insurgency, so does the transition kind of feed into the same mechanism. It's a cyclic process, and you need to understand how the wheels move forward. The Tatmadaw grows stronger as the transition also progresses. Therefore, I have tried to see how geography has dictated the type of capability that the Tatmadaw possesses and what its needs could be. But there are certain problems. A lot of problems outlined by the Tatmadaw have been as follows. You have personnel retention. I guess the small asterisk that I put of people lessening in number in 2014 is indicative of this. The tension between the moderates and hardliners over domestic political issues remains very important. Tension between senior commanders over the policy issue of the degree of Chinese influence. A lot of the capabilities that the Tatmadaw derived were from China. There is a lot of leeway and space in the present situation for other countries to cooperate. resentment and antagonism between the often younger officers in active service in the field and those officers assigned to more comfortable administrative or political duties in rare areas. Antagonism between the army and the other two services. How far the last point plays out also I think is important, since the Air Force has been trying to push its way through and get more acquisitions in place. Therefore, some questions that bother me and which I'm not able to analyze clearly, given the capabilities that I've stated, are you have a garrison state under transition. The veto of the Tatmadaw versus diffusion of power, the three circles that I've indicated, remains the major challenge for Myanmar today. Counter-hedging strategy initiated by the Tatmadaw has played off well in terms of, to some extent, controlling international pressure. But how far that will play out again is questionable. How will the Tatmadaw balance its dependence on China? The role of the West, the role of India becomes very synonymous in this regard. Also, as an aside, I have read a couple of reports where which are emerging that the Myanmar police forces are increasingly taking over controlling insurgency crises in a lot of states. You see more blue than green, apparently. How far that would play out, again, is another big question. I hope some experts here could throw light on that as well. Some references. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. It's a very good presentation in spite of the technical challenges you had. Very well done. And we have time for 10 minutes for question answers. And I will shoot off 2 questions. You don't have to answer it. We can club it around with other questions. One, what has been the response of various international human rights organizations and various organizations working in the realm of refugees to the stance of Bangladesh? Are they pushing Bangladesh government to be a little more considerate, given that they are taking to high seas, or is that aspect completely being neglected? Then the second dimension I have a question is, how does this work? Because if you are getting onto high seas, it's a pretty desperate thing. But does that have a network of smugglers? And if those smugglers are there, what is their country of origin? And who facilitates their movement? It would be a fascinating explanation for us. And any other questions? I see one hand there. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much. I really enjoyed all the presenters speaking on various dimensions. My question is specifically directed to Dr. Priyanca. She had, very extensively covered on the Rohingyas in India. My question is related to Rohingyas in India. I come from Jammu, and there are, as you mentioned, there are a lot of pockets where the Rohingya has been living there, and I've interacted with Rohingyas. Even I'm surprised to see Rohingyas in Jammu. First time it's like a surprise that are these Rohingyas or Gujars or some sort of it. Later I also developed some kind of interest to understand why are they here and what are the, how are they being engaged in with the workforce. It's a very interesting story that I would share with you later on. My question is that what I learned from that, whatever the minimum interactions which I had with this Rohingyas is that I'm just even wondering about that the role of government of India in these issues. What is that stand? Because it seems to me there is some specific reasons for putting up these migrants, because I cannot say they are illegally migrated into India like the Bangladeshis, because it seems there is a design behind it that they should be kept in even the outskirts of Delhi, in Hyderabad and Jammu, or for some reasons. For Jammu, I can tell you that what reasons could begin that Rohingyas, because those serve the minority, especially the Gujar Muslim communities, kind of a labor force for them, like a housemaid and other things, because they don't get Hindu laborers in Jammu region. That's a blunt, very brute fact, but it is true. That's the case. So I am not able to comprehend that the government of India's policy. So if you could give some insight into it, that what is our stand, what is our policy, and was there any specific reasons began to keep these Rohingyas in the Muslim pockets like Hyderabad and Delhi and things. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Uday, Rahul and Suparna. Uday, please.
And I think, again, it is a very complex and a complicated issue which I think the Myanmar government has not been able to fully resolve, and the international community also has not been very helpful in the matter either. The automatic reaction of the international community is of linking it with terrorism. Now, if the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh become easy recruiting ground for terrorist organizations in West Asia, and if the developments in neighboring Indonesia also encourage the role of terrorist organizations in amongst the Rohingya refugees, then actually we have a very serious problem on hand. And the way national governments and the international community is responding to this crisis is to say the least very inadequate, considering the seriousness of the issue. I think I'll stop here. Yeah.
One more question and then Rahul.
Well, mine is more sort of comment than a question, but I'd certainly like the panelists to respond to that. I beg to disagree with the point that Myanmar has to be squarely blamed for what is happening in the country. There is a history behind it. The panelists have spoken on it, and I'm sure this issue will keep coming and keep bothering us in the next 2 days. But certainly Rohingyas is not one issue on which you can blame, put the blame on Myanmar and go away. You have to look at the history, you have to look at the region's politics, and therefore, as ASEAN, in the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, it has already been said that it's a regional problem now. It is beyond Myanmar and Bangladesh's hands, and you have to find a regional solution to this regional problem. Now, what is that regional solution is something that the countries of this region have to look at, and certainly leaving those people on the high seas is not an option. But also, and certainly Myanmar has more responsibility than others in terms of looking at this issue. But Bangladesh also cannot wash its hands off of this problem. The second is we have to also look at it domestically. I mean, a Myanmarese person and an official would be the best source to tell you as to how complicated and entrenched this problem is. But then you have to dissociate the human rights problem with the women issues. For example, Professor Priyanca mentioned of this, issue of childbirths, and there has to be a gap of 3 years. Looking at the Rohingya, the Rakhine region, and the state of affairs there, the kind of poverty they have, and lack of hygiene and health infrastructure, I don't see a problem with this. I mean, you have to also look at the welfare of women also in that region. So I think we have to look at both human rights and the women rights in those parts of the country.
Before you answer, His Excellency is keen to.
Well, actually, what I have is just one thing is to supplement what Ms. Ramya has said just now about the Tatmadaw and the evolution of the Tatmadaw. And I just want to add one fact that that might be escape the notice of the scholars, is that if you look at our army, up to 1988, all our weapons came from the West. In 1988, there was an arms embargo imposed on us. And the army find itself without no source for its equipment. And the only one that was willing to sell arms to Myanmar was China. It was not that, to tell you very frankly, we were so impressed with the Chinese weaponry, or we were so enamored with China. But it was through force of circumstances. Because we have always depended on the West for our arms, or even from India. And let me, just since I have the floor, just add one historical note. I think, of course, most of you are familiar. In 1948, when the insurgency was at the height, and the Myanmar government was in the danger of being overthrown, it was the Indian 25-pounder artillery pieces which helped them to fight. And we never forgot this fact. And we also have, of course, our military relations with India. Because I want to put this in perspective, because, why we have to turn to China. And because up to, until 1988, we never had any arms from China. All our arms from the West, or from Israel, or from the then Yugoslavia, mostly. Regarding the Rohingya issue, well, of course, I think in the interest of time, I will not go into the details of our position, which is quite well known to all of you. But I have one reservation about the statement made by you, Dr. When you said that I may have been mistaken, but as I understand, when you said that sectarian violence is growing and getting worse, because you gave the impression that that was made from the statement was as though this is happening now. As the sectarian violence, the last major incident, happened in 2012, 2 years ago. And we have been trying to resolve by having interfaith discussions and trying to find our ways. In fact, our organization, the Myanmar Institute of Strategic and International Studies, is also looking at this question. Yes, the figures, I also have some problems with your figures. Let us say there are all sorts of figures, between 800,000 to 1.4 million, what we call Bengalis and what people call Rohingyas in our country. But the thing is that we know that they are within our border, these people. And in the census, what we try to do is that when we conducted the census, was that we try to include them. But only one problem was that we said we cannot accept the term Rohingya because that was never in any of our constitutions. And that is why that is a problem. That is why that I have some problem with your statement saying that sectarian violence is growing and getting worse, because it implies that it is going on today, which is, I'm not very sure, is the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all your questions. I hope I do justice to my attempts to answer them. First of all, Sanjay, there is a difference when we say refugees come from Myanmar and economic migrants from Bangladesh. As the UN definition for refugees goes, a person who is categorized as a refugee is someone who is fleeing persecution on 5 grounds. And here so is granted the refugee status. And India gave that refugee status to Bangladeshis post 1971 when we brought them in. And then once Bangladesh was created, Indira Gandhi said, you're no longer refugees, you're all supposed to go back. So world over now, Bangladeshis are not considered as refugees. They are given the terminology of migrants. So the burden of asking them to take them back is not there, and to take them in. You just say that they are economic migrants and they're fleeing flooding, poverty, overpopulation. So Bangladesh does not come into the burden sharing international forum with that perspective, whereas Myanmar and India and all the others would come in. Now, again, the remaining South Asian countries still don't, because none of us, other than Sri Lanka, we have not signed the UN Refugee Convention. And we do not have a UN refugee, we do not have per se a governmental policy on refugees in India. Neither are we signatories, nor do we even have a regional framework. Professor Chimney, with whom I've worked for a couple of years, we had tried to formulate a model refugee law, but that has still not come up to a level at which it can be passed as a legislation. And for very obvious reasons, because the minute it becomes a law, you are bound under sovereignty to, give the, refulma and give status like that. Now, so that first of all answers the question that we do not have a refugee law. What do we have? We have an ad hoc refugee policy that works as and when suits the political expediency of the Indian state. When it suits us, when we want to be the Chanakyan logic of friends, friends, enemies, enemies, your friend, so we welcome the Tibetan refugees. When our prime minister gets assassinated, we throw all the Sri Lankan refugees into camps, into prison-like conditions. When we want to have good relations with the Myanmarese government, we close up all our borders with the northeastern states and do not allow any of the Myanmarese refugees to come in. When you want to show the world you are a good host, then you do take in some. So it has exactly been expediency which has driven refugee policy in India. Afghanistan, the Afghani refugees, the Tibetan refugees have been the ones who have been the best taken care of. Now, of course, high seas and the network of smuggling is a very, very well-known fact. And there is a lot of literature today on international trafficking, which works and overlaps with migration. Migration studies have shown that trafficking links are continuously working at the same point of time. When you have migration flows, you will have trafficking flows exploiting. This is human trafficking, there is sex trafficking, there is slave trafficking, and the images that we've been getting in our media right now are, kind of totally illustrating this. Yes, in fact, I would recommend that while my article on the refugees in in Hyderabad is going to get published very soon, we have Mr. Ravi Nair based in Delhi, who is particularly doing the study on the Jammu refugees, the Rohingya refugees. And so we are in fact, next month we are going to be at a workshop in Darjeeling where we're going to look at various papers on Rohingya refugees from all over the country. And we are looking at a full publication out of it. So it is labor which draws you away, and as you said it very well, Delhi is small. Delhi still does have a few Rohingya camps where you have Rohingyas living in certain pockets in Delhi, but they have moved northwards. When the first information started coming in from Jammu, all of us in the refugee networks were very surprised that why Jammu? But then it is wherever they can find a place and they can live and they get some solidarity and community networks to go in there. Now the UNHCR in New Delhi has agreed to give refugee status to the Rohingya refugees. And Sir, Your Excellency, the figures that I have quoted is from a mail that I have received on the 1st of June from the UNHCR office in New Delhi, because this paper was going in for publication, and they have given me these exact figures that as of 1st of June 2015, there are 8,836 Rohingya refugees and 2,434 Rohingya asylum seekers that are registered with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in India. And among them, we have collected this data from various organizations in Hyderabad. Around 1,400 persons are currently residing in Hyderabad only. So this is the figures that I have from the 1st of June. And Well, I can just say that when you make a statement that sectarian violence is not worsening, well, from a human rights and an activist perspective, you can just counterpose it with the argument that if in Hyderabad 5 years ago there were only 100 Rohingya refugees, and 5 years later that figure has shot up to 2,000 as registered by the UNHCR, then why is it so? When the UNHCR gives an asylum and a refugee card to a refugee coming from Myanmar, the refugee officer has undergone that whole process, legal process, to determine that that person has been fleeing violence from the home country. So just these numbers themselves, I think so, are, if I may say, just an explicative proof of the rising incidence of violence in the home country from where these, refugees are fleeing. So if I'm making a broad sweeping statement there, it is a reflection of the growing numbers that I'm accounting here, sir. That's all I would like to say there. When it comes to Uday's point on securitization, well, my paper on the Rohingya refugees in Hyderabad actually stemmed from that one little incident where a suspected Rohingya refugee from Hyderabad was picked up because of the Bodh Gaya blasts in 2013, and then again the example that she's been talking about. And along with the trafficking linkages with migration, today we see this overarching securitization debate, and that is that migrants, people fleeing poverty, violence, are those who are also willing to, if told for ideology's sake and for religion's sake, to feed their families, to take up arms. When we have the Pakistani Taliban giving a call and asking people who are, getting into these boats and staying stranded in the seas to come and openly give the clarion call that come, pick up your arms and kill, and that's only when you're going to get bread to eat, then it is very much explicative of the very dangerous signs and networks that we can see coming up. I don't want to be provocative here to say that, yes, there is, it is, refugees are terrorists. That is what the state perspective always is. There is one or two examples, and this leads to the securitization of the debate. This leads to countries which can welcome more asylum seekers, close their doors, close their borders, and say that we are not going to take in our quota of people who need to be taken in. Because at the end of the day, the international refugee law appeals on just one moral principle, and that is the principle of non-refoulement. And it just tells us simply that if at your doorstep you have a person who is fleeing for his life, and who, if you close the door on his face and you make him go back and he can die, then you as the host nation should at least let him step inside your house. What we do later is something for international consultation. But refoulement, the principle of refoulement, is customary international law binding on all nations in the United Nations. And on that basis, we appeal to everybody's morality for refugees. Well, I hope just a few questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Ramya.
Sir, I completely agree with you in saying that before 1988, a lot of these arms were from the West. I even listed them out in terms of Yugoslavia, USA, UK, and Japan. I also have a lot of works that suggest that before 1988, Burma's arm imports were very modest. It initially received some assistance from the US, UK, and India, but as soon as the isolationist policy followed by the sanctions started, there was an attempt to adopt and stray away from foreign sanctions, because of which a lot of the data that I presented showed that the arms acquisitions were from the PRC, not that there was any enamoring in that regard. I hope that clears my point. Thank you.
I'm sure many of you have lot more questions to ask, but let's end the session here now, and I presume we're breaking for tea?
Yes.
And we can carry forward our conversations over a cup of tea and come back. We started 20 minutes late, so we are closing 20 minutes behind schedule. And it has been a very interesting session. We have seen some very passionate presentations, and we have seen some really sharp responses from the floor, and that's how it should be. And congratulations to the organizers for putting together such wonderful team for this session, and speakers from floor who have asked really nice questions. And let's take a break and come back after a cup of tea. Thank you.